Good morning.
Hey, I'm gonna restart my computer. It's been
Okay,
up for a while, and I don't want no problems. I'll be right back.
sure thing.
All right.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed. Good morning, Paula.
Good morning.
Good morning, Megan.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you. Hi, Melissa.
Morning. How's everyone?
Doing good. Tony was on just a minute ago. He said he had to restart his computer, so he'll be back. Actually, restarting is a good metaphor for Easter Sunday. You just push the reboot button.
That's exactly what we're doing today.
It's rebooting.
I came home from sunrise service and had second breakfast like a good hobbit.
Oh, good. Yeah, we did too. We had second breakfast also.
My breakfast, which you hopefully won't see me eat, is purple cookies.
Purple cookies. Are they purple for Easter?
Ube. We found them at the store. We're not intending to cook them on Easter weekend, but it happened.
And I rebooted my breakfast. I went back to a protein smoothie today after spending months on waffles and pancakes.
Oh, this is like a reverse Lent. You did that backwards.
I know, but I need rebooted so bad.
I hear that. Good morning again, Tony. Good morning, Rob.
Hey.
Good morning.
I just been making fun of people in my old Easter tradition for the last 2 days.
I'm missing our old Easter traditions.
I do not. They were traumatizing for children and were pretty cruel when you think about it.
We didn't do that with ours. I promise. They loved it, but it's another thing this pandemic has taken away from us. Normally, we would be with about 15 people this morning, and
Oh yeah,
just not happening.
Yeah.
Missing Easter people. But I got to know, what are Easter speeches exactly?
So, like in the traditional Black church, we do these Easter programs. We do Christmas and Easter programs, and so like everybody, there's a play, usually some misrepresentation of the resurrection, which is because there's 4 different versions, and then so the kids do like these recitations, like these Easter speeches, like I can't even think of. They were all horrible, like. And the kids would be traumatized because you're 3 years old. Your mama wants you to get up in front of a bunch of people you don't know and say, "Happy Easter, everybody," and you're like crying and go back to your. It was cruel.
I agree.
And the sad part about it was usually like it's always ego driven by the parents. So like there's always a parent who comes in like the last week of rehearsals who wants their child to have a speech. There's no way in hell this child's gonna learn his speech by Sunday, but you're gonna put them up there anyway and get mad when they screw it up.
Well, in the churches I grew up in, the pastor would never give up any of his precious time to let anybody else talk.
Oh, it was an entirely different program other than the service. So yeah, that hadn't changed. That was consistent.
We had a sunrise service this morning with Beloved Community Church, and it was nice to. I was thinking it was going to be storming, like when I was looking at the forecast, and I was delighted when we got there. It was foggy. We had a couple of raindrops toward the end, but other than it was nice to be with people. Anyway, so I'm glad to be with y'all this morning. Thank you for being here for Easter. So I'm going to go ahead and get the liturgy up. If we can just have kind of regular rolls, that would be. Does that sound good, everybody?
Awesome.
We'll let me share up the.
Well, hang on. Before you say regular rolls, I think we've got everybody, which means we have an excess. So, I mean,
We do.
Melissa and Tony can do. They can do liturgy and voice of the people. It's
Okay,
nice to have both of them here. I don't have to do anything.
You're bound. That's fine. That's great. So, Melissa, do you mind being voice of the people?
No problem.
All right. Ready when y'all are.
Hi, good morning. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed.
The risen Christ is here among us.
Praise the Lord. Alleluia.
Even death cannot separate us from the love of God.
Neither things seen nor unseen, nor anything else in all creation.
Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed.
All right, so our responsive reading is coming from Psalms 9, 1 through 2, 7 through 11, 13 through 14 from Wilder Gaffney's A Woman's Lectionary. I will give thanks to God who saves with my whole heart. I will tell of all your wonderful deeds.
I will rejoice and exult in you. I will sing praise to your name most high.
God, who his majesty sits enthroned forever, she has established her throne for judgment.
She judges the world in righteousness. She judges the people with equity.
She whose faithfulness is a stronghold for the oppressed. A stronghold in times. Oh, that was my cursor. Base cursor. a stronghold in time of trouble.
They trust you, they who know your name, for you do not forsake those who seek you, redeeming God.
Sing praises to the Holy One enthroned in Zion. Declare her deeds among the peoples.
Be gracious to me, gracious one. See what I suffer from those who hate me.
You lift me up from the gates of death so that I might recount all your praises.
And in the gates of daughter Zion, rejoice in your salvation.
Genesis 1, 1 through 2, 26 through 27, and 2, 1 through 4. When beginning, God, created the heavens and the earth was shapeless and formless, and bleakness covered the face of the deep, while the Spirit of God, she fluttered over the face of the waters. And God said, let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, and the animals, and the whole earth, and over every creeping creature that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in God's own image. In God's own image, God created them, female and male, God created them. And the heavens and the earth were complete, along with all their multitude. Then God finished on the seventh day the work that God had done, and rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on it God rested from all the work that God had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created.
Matthew 28, 1 through 10. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And look, there was a great earthquake, for a messenger of God descending from heaven came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. Its appearance was like lightning, and its clothing was white as snow. For fear of the messenger, the guards shook and were as though dead. But the messenger responded to the women and said, fear not. I know that you all are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, just as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and see, he is on to Galilee ahead of you, where you will all see him. This is my message for you. So the women left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples the news. Then all of a sudden, Jesus met them and said, Shalom. And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and bowed down, worshiping him. Then Jesus said to them, Fear not, go and tell my sisters and brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. May God add blessings to the reading of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Amy Jill Levine writes, seeing the earthquake and the angel, the guards, oh, wait a minute. I gotta move my feet people around. Okay. Seeing the earthquake and the angel, the guards are struck senseless. But the women, guided by the angel, who like Jesus understands their fear, continue to act faithfully. They witness the empty tomb and they follow precisely the instructions to report quickly the news of the resurrection. Although they are not included in the reference to his disciples or mentioned as present at the Great Commission, the angel's words in the meetings with Jesus indicate their substantive role in the Easter mission. Indeed, it is Jesus who first greets them, and they in turn are first to worship him. Matthew records of the 11 that some doubted, but of the women, only their legitimate fear and their joy are reported. These independent, motivated women are both the first witnesses to the resurrection and the first missionaries of the church.
Thank you all for beginning us in worship today. I appreciate y'all being here. It's good to be present virtually with each other. We're going to go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And if someone would like to, Angela, are you still available? Because I see that you're having some Zoom issues.
I'm having enough Zoom issues that I think I probably shouldn't be.
Okay.
I got the chat.
Okay. So yeah, Tony, if you'll look at the chat, if someone else can look at Facebook, and maybe someone else can look at YouTube. So those of you who are streaming, if you're joining us today for Easter, if you would like to lift up a prayer request, please feel free to type it in the comments or the chat. Also, if you're streaming, please like or leave a comment about where you're watching from. That gives us a way to record your presence with us today. Glad that you're joining us here for Easter. So we'll go to a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And then if you would like to lift up in a minute your prayer concerns or your thanksgivings, feel free to do so. Let's go to God in prayer. God, on this Resurrection Sunday, as we talk about the miracle of your ongoing presence with us today and your resurrection many years ago, we're also mindful that we are in the midst of a miracle at this moment, that we are connected online across thousands and thousands of miles, that we are worshiping simultaneously across the country with people who are not physically present, but present to each other. God, on this Easter Sunday, we remember both your physical presence and your extended presence. The way that somehow, even though we are separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, that we are there also with the women at the tomb. Not through a miracle of technology, but through a miracle of our hearts and the story that we share. God, in this profound way that we are connected, we are also connected with all life on earth and with your life. The way that you brought the world into existence and you keep bringing it into existence. God, help us to see the resurrection that's present in every moment. The way that we get to be present with you, that not even death can separate us from you. So while we bring to you our joys and our celebrations, although we come to you with deep gratitude for the way that we're able to be connected to each other and to you, we also come knowing that the world is in a desperate place. The perils of climate change and plague and war all seem very present with us. We feel with the disciples as they stood on that Good Friday, often as if the world is ending. And yet you promise resurrection and renewal, that your work is not finished. So we bring to you both our joys and our griefs, our laments and our thanksgivings, and we lay them all at your feet. I invite you to share.
Gratitude for new life coming into the world.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Prayers for Angela's Aunt Rebecca, who went to the hospital this morning, and her family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Michael Williams.
Lord, hear our prayer.
In gratitude for the new resurrection of the church that seeks to authentically follow you again.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Healing for Melanie.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For our two friends going through chemotherapy.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Mason Ayers.
Lord, hear our prayer.
D. Linson.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Neela.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Rob's parents, who'll be traveling to us next week.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For all those finishing the semester and also especially those who are graduating.
Lord, hear our prayer. For Kyler Kim, Lord, hear our prayer.
For transgender youth.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Prayers for Meg starting a new job tomorrow.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For peace in war-torn countries.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For peace in this country.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gracious God, for all the prayers that we speak out loud, for the prayers that we don't know how to put into words, we give you thanks that when we don't know what to say, that your Spirit prays for us with sighs too deep for words. And we join with Jesus in the prayer that he taught his church. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your kingdom come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So today's the reason that we're here. Easter Sunday, 2,000 years ago, is really what gave birth to this religious movement. Jesus had been in ministry for 3 years. He had a group of followers around him. His teachings were certainly powerful, but they were still a movement within Judaism. It was only after the resurrection that they really became the church. It's when they had experienced the power of this person in their midst, and they called him Messiah. This was an ancient Jewish word that meant God's anointed one. And typically it was reserved for kings, for generals, but for them to call Jesus the Christ, the Messiah, and to say that the proof of his messiahship was that he came back from the dead, that he was resurrected. That was what spun this whole thing into a different gear. This is what changed the movement and what really started a new religion. And lots of people say Jesus didn't come to start a new religion. And in many ways, I think that's true, but it also kind of misses the point. Because what the disciples experienced, what the people around Jesus experienced, was just reality in a completely new way. Suddenly things were changed for them. Now, I decided a long time ago that I would never use an Easter sermon to try to gin up people's belief in a literal resurrection, especially if, as I felt, I was called to try to reach people who had been hurt or burned or turned off to church. And so many people have been told, you got to toe the line, you got to believe these things, sign the dotted line, or you're not really a Christian. And I knew if I wanted to reach people who had been hurt by church, who've been turned off to church, you don't come in doing a hard sell trying to say, this is why you should believe in Christ. And there are these books out there that people have written full of proofs, full of arguments. Of course, we know especially after the last decade that arguing doesn't change people's minds, right? It just makes us dig in more. And if someone tries to argue me into belief, I really don't want to have what they're selling. So I don't want to try to argue anyone into belief in a literal resurrection, because as I've shared with people sometimes, like when I talk about what I believe, I remember someone asked me once, do you really believe all this stuff you preach? And I had to be honest. And I said, 80% of the time, I believe 80% of it. 10% of the time, I believe everything. And 10% of the time, I don't believe anything. So I really feel like I have to be honest. Like I have significant doubts about all the miracle stories in the Bible. But I don't think the point of Easter, and I don't think we tell this story in order to gin up belief in a literal physical resurrection. I don't think that's the point of Easter. The stories themselves don't try to argue anyone into belief, you know? So I don't think that the goal of Easter, and I don't think the goal of what I'm saying to you now, is to make the story credible to skeptical people. Honestly, as I've shared, I tend towards skepticism myself. And there are a couple of reasons I think it is good to be skeptical of this story. And by the way, neither of them is like, oh, we're too scientific now and we know that miracles don't happen, because that's not really a good argument. I mean, it's not just doubt that miracles happen. There's some good reasons to be skeptical about the story that we hear. The first one is CPR. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was invented in the 1950s, right? Well, actually, it goes way back before then. There was an Iranian physician in like the 15th century who came up with the kind of, CPR, but, cultural appropriation and scientific credit and all that. Anyway, 1950s, they come up with CPR. And, we've been learning about CPR ever since. Some of you probably have CPR certification. I got my wilderness first aid certificate last year, and I went to a thing where they trained us in CPR. And one of the instructors said, the thing I need to prepare you for is CPR doesn't work miracles. That if you start CPR on someone, the likelihood is that they're not going to make it. They said by the time you start CPR, things are already pretty bad. And the problem is, if you watch television, 95% of the time, they've actually studied this and watched how often CPR is portrayed on movies and in television. 95% of the time, someone starts CPR and the victim pops back up. When the reality is exactly the opposite. About 5% of the time, CPR is effective. Only 5% of the time. And even of that 5% of the time, the people who make it often are changed for life. And the problem is, when you train people for CPR and they're expecting a 95% success rate. When they do it and it doesn't work, they're left feeling this awful guilt and trauma. And so they've started telling people, when they train folks now, don't believe what you see on television. Because what you see on television is designed for a cheap emotional punch, right? It's designed to make you feel grief and, oh my gosh, are they going to make it? Although usually you're like, okay, they're going to make it. They started CPR. 95% of the time, they're going to get better. So, but it's designed for sort of this cheap emotional punch. You feel grief and you get to feel happy. And that's not what Easter is. That's not at all what Easter is. In fact, what you encounter in the Easter story is not just, oh, now they're happy because Jesus is alive. What they start off with is terror. Bookmark that. We'll come back to it. The second reason I think it's good to be a little skeptical is that you don't need resurrection to believe in an afterlife. This is not a story about the afterlife. This isn't a story about living after you die. The world is full of near-death experiences. Some of us have had experiences where we felt caught up to the second heaven, and we were convinced that there is much more to life than this physical stuff that we're touching, and that somehow, we're not exactly sure how, but somehow consciousness persists after death. You can believe that and not believe in resurrection. Piece of cake. So you don't need that necessarily to feel okay about dying. Or so when people address the resurrection as though it's somehow an answer to these problems, it's not. It's not an answer. It's not meant to make us feel better. It's not like a surprise. Oh, look, God can work miracles. God can do magic tricks. This is not what the resurrection is about. I think one of the powerful things about this story is the fear. It's when they go and they encounter Christ, when they find the risen tomb, first when they find the empty tomb, they're outraged. First, it's someone's taken Jesus's body and they're furious. There's this sense of, oh my gosh, one travesty upon another. They rush to the tomb, and again, divine beings descending from the sky, earthquakes, fear. The soldiers had a good response. They cowered, right? The women, stunningly, are watching this happen, and the angel says to them, don't be afraid. That's what angels always say. Fear not. Don't be afraid. And it might seem strange to us if reading it from a modern perspective, since we're used to stories about CPR, when every other comic book movie has, we think someone's dead. Oh, nope, now they're back. So many stories have resuscitation in them. When so many stories are about answering our need to feel better, when we encounter the resurrection story, the primary emotion is fear, is terror. Why should we be afraid? Why should we be afraid if the hero of the story gets up? Why should we be afraid if this is just proof that there's life beyond the tomb? I think there's reason the characters are afraid. If Jesus doesn't stay in the tomb, what else that we feel is certain is at risk? What are the implications? What they experience when they see the empty tomb is not a comforting presence. It's not a soothing thing. It's the revelation that the God they thought they understood is pretty unpredictable. I mean, we've heard, right? There's only two things that are certain. One of them is tomorrow, taxes. The other one is death, right? And now death is questionable. So lots of things now are uncertain. And I think that throws us into a place where we have to wonder, what is God up to? What's God doing here? In a lot of ways, this story, and I like the fact that Willa Gaffney pairs this story with the creation account in Genesis. When we encounter the resurrection Christ, in a way, we're encountering creation all over again. We're seeing the darkness of the waters of chaos. We're seeing the Spirit blowing over the face of the deep. It's very unsettling to encounter the risen Christ, to see that God is recreating stuff. Things are going to be different, right? Things are changed. What's now expected of me? What's my role in this, right? The angel comes and says, don't be afraid. And the other thing I love about this story is that Matthew has this weird thing. And the story almost, did you notice there's a hiccup in it? This angel says, go to Galilee, tell the disciples, go to Galilee, and Jesus will meet them there, right? And so the women turn, and there's Jesus. They didn't have to get all the way to Galilee. They turn, and there's Jesus, and Jesus says the same thing. Peace be with you. Don't be afraid. And he repeats what the angel has said. Probably, yeah, because they were so completely terrified that, okay, what are we supposed to do now? I forgot. What were the instructions? Do you remember? So, Jesus has to repeat them. So Jesus says, don't be afraid. Tell the disciples, I'm going to Galilee. I'll meet you there. And at that point, in some ways, I'm even more afraid. Oh my God, what's he going to say? What's next? There should be a little bit of unsettledness, a little bit of fear about the resurrection. And so I'll share, even though sometimes I'm skeptical, I need this kind of God. I need the God that leaves things unfinished. In a time of stress and chaos, when we are so scattered, when it feels like Rome is winning, when it feels like the earth is ending, I need a God that leaves things a little unfinished. I would rather have a God that leaves me a little unsettled, that makes me a little nervous, right? A God that's a little unpredictable, because what's predictable is just despair. Fear contains within it the possibility of joy. If things are ending with a question mark, if things are unsettled, then there's more possibility on the other side of that unsettledness. I feel like there's room for God to work. Creation is still unfolding. God's still doing stuff. The other thing I like about the fact that she paired this story with the creation story is that they've just finished the Sabbath, and this is the first day of the week. Right? So creation ends. From the creation story, God ends. God ends God's work. God's done. God rests. No. A new day starts. A new week begins. God's work continues. God took a rest, but God's not done. And in a way, that's what the tomb feels like. God took a rest, but God's not done. There's more to come. And so the story continues to unfold. So that's why, for me, I don't gin up belief in Easter. I feel like, in a way, that it puts a period where God puts a comma, that God is extending things, that creation's continuing to unfold, that this isn't something that's done, that this is something that God is doing and continuing. So those are my thoughts for today. I would love to hear your responses, reflections, etc.
One thing that jumped out at me today, on that Easter morning,
Did we lose Paula? Man, talk about being unfinished.
I was so wanting to hear the rest of that thought, but
I was too.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
and hopefully she'll come back and share it with us. So, I have to go therapist for just a minute, as I want to do, but there is a cognitive fallacy that leads to depression, hopelessness, and anxiety. And that is how it is right now is how it will be forever.
Mm.
And that's often what we are working with in the therapeutic process of, fighting the assumption that whatever is hard right now is going to be hard forever, or, whatever has transpired up to this point, like this is the end of the story. And that necessarily leads to hopelessness. And I think in one of my therapists, who was very influential to me, once told me, it is always safe to assume that you are in the middle of the story. Like you have not yet reached the end point. It's always safe to assume that you're in the middle of the story. And I love that as a framework for Easter, because I think our faith kind of dies, becomes crystallized if God's work ended on Easter morning. I mean, God is doing so much more beyond that, and there's so much hope in that.
Wow. Thank you for that.
I want to talk about the honesty thing.
Okay.
And a little bit of fear. Like literally, like I just wish more leaders could be more honest, especially leaders in the church. Like we don't know everything. Like if everything in the Bible was a proven fact, there would be no reason for faith. And like people don't get that. So it's okay to doubt. It's okay to question. It's okay to be confused sometimes. But we have like created this like strong arm version of God and Jesus that if you don't believe this in this particular way, in this particular order, then you're going to hell. And it's like, nah, that's not how this is supposed to work. I just reject that whole notion of God is so rigid that, it's like literally his way or the highway. And it's like, no, that's not how this is supposed to work. The other thing I want to talk about is the fear. Whenever the angels appear in the Bible, they always say, fear not. And I think it's almost like saying, hey girls, we're back, because they always say that when they appear, right? And so like, this was the first time I really thought about the fear aspect. I mean, of course, your friend's dead 3 days, they come back from the dead. You don't know if you're going to get Night of the Living Dead or Dawn of the Living Dead or, Jesus Christ Superstar. And so I guess like there is some like healthy fear around that. But I'm also reminded of when we talk about the story of Pentecost, like the fear that they had to be under because Jesus was put to death as an example.
Yeah.
Like if you want to believe this, then you're going to die. And everybody who believes what you believe is going to die. So like that fear right there is not the fear not type fear. It's the, oh crap, what are we gonna do now fear? And I think that having Jesus come back, kind of like comforts that fear for the people, for the believers at that time. But I've never really thought about fear in the oh my God type of fear thing until today, because like I said, the angels are like, oh, fear not, doubt, whatever.
And I was thinking about fear too before I froze.
Yes.
That Easter morning, the disciples, the men, were hiding in that upper room, totally convinced that the Roman soldiers were out hunting them and coming to get them. The women, on the other hand, were ready to confront a few Roman soldiers at the tomb to get in and anoint Jesus's body. So even though they had to be afraid, they weren't so afraid that they were frozen and not willing to do anything. So they weren't afraid in the face of death. But then all of a sudden life appears and it scares them to death.
Wow.
I think so many of us are afraid of life and that abundant life that Jesus offers, that we hide ourselves away and who we are and what we're thinking and what life is all about, just so we will fit in and not put ourselves in danger with our peers.
Wow, that's a whole word. Thank you, Paula.
I got a comment from Camille. Says God creates out of chaos. There's always a mess before the beautiful artwork is completed.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Rob, you've had your hand up. Thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So the connection between the fear theme and what Melissa was saying about that the cognitive fallacy, right? That this is how it is how it's going to go on being.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, I like so when Jesus is first getting the band together, right? All right, gonna go make you fishers of men and the whole thing. Like it's new, we presume, for these folks to, all right, we're gonna be part of this. This is cool. This is interesting. But traveling rabbis are a thing. Little movements that rise up and fall are a thing. It like it's not ontologically new, right?
Mhm.
It's new to them, but it's not something nobody's seen before, right? And so I think they kind of think they know what movie they're in. And even to the point of the triumphal entry and all this, now we're getting really excited, like, hey, the movie's coming to a head. This is pretty great, right? So then when everything goes south and they're afraid because they think, oh, now they're coming for us, they still think they know what movie they're in.
Yeah.
And the thing is, again, it doesn't mean anything has actually changed. It's just more of an, oh, this again. Because yeah, we've lost to the Romans before. We know what it's like to be under the boot of the Romans. We've known this for a while, And I mean, it just going back through their people's history. It's like whether you think about like slavery in Egypt and the Exodus and wandering in the desert. It's like, yeah, man, suffering. Oh, good, more suffering. This is great. We know how to do this. So there's just that sense of like, oh, more of this again. Like it's just leftovers and leftovers and leftovers. And what I'm really struck by is this sense that like in the resurrection is this moment of like, wait, we didn't lose?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh crap. That's exactly what I heard you talking about, Dave. It was like in that moment of wait, we didn't lose? Now what?
Yeah.
Because now we're really off script. Now we really have actually broken out. It's like, oh no, this is like Psycho. We killed Janet Leigh 30 minutes into the movie. Now what do we film, right? Like this is what are we in for? This is not what I was expecting. That just I don't know. I really love that.
Thank you. I love your pop culture references. But yeah, I know. I think what you're saying, it ties into what like Paul was just saying too, is like, the women go, I mean, and thank you for bringing that up, Paula. Like the women go to face in Matthew's version, there are soldiers at the tomb. Like, okay, so we're going to take these things and we're going to say, excuse me, we're going in there and the soldiers are going to let us in because we're coming to do our job. And they're not afraid of the soldiers. They're not afraid to face death, but the idea of facing life in a way is so much more unsettling. Like you're saying, oh God, what's next? It really is a lot more transformative power there. Yeah.
It wasn't just we're going in there, it's we're going in there and you're going to move the stone for us so we can get in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
But think about how they've been like just terrorized with fear. Like when they got there, the stone was gone and the soldiers are passed out. Imagine how they just been sitting there cowering at home like the dudes. No one would have witnessed it.
That's right. Yeah.
I think it's really meaningful that it is the women that are the ones that like, no, we're not done yet. Mm-hmm. We're gonna go and do what we need to do for our friend. Jesus' whole movement was for the marginalized. So you got to think that they had the most to gain if, by the change that Jesus was promising. And I also, I really appreciate what you said about not like hammering in that like the resurrection is real. Because I personally like to think a little heretically sometimes and wonder like if he really did die, if Jesus just died, and I mean a resurrection still occurred in the sense that this movement, like it didn't die,
right.
Sure. Even though they were hiding in a room for a little while, these guys still got up and the women still got up and went out and said, hey, we're going to do this thing where we own all of our stuff in common and we're going to take care of our community and spread this idea, across the Rome and beyond.
I think so. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate you pointing out, like, so the early church and their notion, again, they came out with this radical new lifestyle. We're going to share all these things in common. We're going to do this stuff. I think people would be more afraid. Let me back up. I think it's easier to swallow a miracle of God raising someone from the dead than it is to swallow the idea that people could live together and share their stuff in common. I mean, I think that's harder for people to believe than Jesus getting up from the dead. Honestly, there was a friend of mine on I won't say friend, Twitter acquaintance, posted a question a while back that said, let's pretend that we just found Jesus's body and so the resurrection didn't happen. What changes for you? And there were a lot of people who said, oh, well, I guess I'm just not going to be Christian now. I'm going to go do whatever I want because nothing's real. But like, really? That's what you get out of all this? Other people were like, no, everything he said, the example he lived, everything he did is still valid, right? And there's a world of difference between those two perspectives. And I think part of that is that fear. If I encounter the risen Christ, what do I actually think Christ is going to expect of me? Oh my God. Anyway, so I'm sorry, Paula, go ahead.
Megan, I agree that that's a real possibility, but I also think that something earth-shattering had to happen to make the disciples get out of that upper room and actually live that kind of life. It wasn't just something they decided one day, oh, let's try this. Something had to shake them to their core.
Thank you.
I love that we have to have it is kind of amusing to think that we have to have a miracle showing that death isn't real just so some dudes will get up and do something.
Yeah. It's true.
Hey, that's the way it's always been in the church.
It is. Go ahead, Tony.
All right, so coming from Camille, she said that was the first women's march. I love that.
Oh,
also,
yes.
She says, wondering if the followers of Christ had been so marginalized that they had to be communal in order to survive. And I think that's pretty possible. Yeah,
that's a good point. Thank you for that.
The other thing is, you brought something up that we talked. Well, I know I mentioned it before during service, but I would if we were to find Jesus' body, or we were to find this scroll that says, "Psych, none of this is real."
Right.
Do you know how many people would reject the teachings of Christ because sometimes I think religion is a break on evil.
Mm-hmm.
I really when I was in the third grade, I remember thinking, what if God did not exist? What if none of this existed? And at 8 years old, I'm like, the 10 Commandments are still a pretty good way to live. Don't take your neighbor's stuff. That's just. But there are people who are so greedy, so self-centered, so self-absorbed that I think the only reason that they even have religion is to keep their evil nature in check.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know gay people who have not practiced who they are because their parents are still alive, and when their parents die, it's oh, let's go through the process. But it's a break for some people to keep them from doing evil.
Mm-hmm.
I just really believe that. This is okay. I can't do that because God gonna get me. But if there was not a God, y'all would be in trouble.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
So there's an interesting question in there, Tony, for me about authority, and is our faith predicated on a magic act, or are we willing to buy into a really great set of ideas that ultimately lead to everybody's well-being and everybody being taken care of and treated with respect? Or do we need some magician to tell us, no, guys, this is how you're supposed to act?
They don't care about it. I literally think people, especially mainstream conservative religion, they don't even care about that. They need the magic act. Without the magic act, nothing else is valid. Without Jesus being dead, partially riding for 3 days, get back up on Sunday, nothing else really matters. without you magically go, bam, there goes some fish, bam, there goes some bread, till you got way too much. Like you didn't see the end of the line. Nothing else matters. And that's the way that they live.
I'm tying that
I think
to
it's sorry.
sorry. I'm just real quick. I'm tying that to some of the narratives in recent years about such and such leader, and I won't name names, but I think it'll be obvious, being ordained by God to be president, or like God's chosen person.
Two Chronicles. The man said 2 Chronicles. That's all you need to know.
Right. Like there has to be like, if we inject some like magic-y authority into this, then I can buy into it no matter what the details and the bullet points look like.
That proves my point. Like literally that solidifies the point.
Yeah.
Because you can't say that you're a God-fearing man when you don't even know the names of the literal Bible. How does that even make sense? How does that make sense?
I want to say that, like, if the tenets of conservative Christianity are as they have been put down, the oppressive nature of the whole thing is true, and how it's supposed to be, then yeah, I need the magic act. Like, I need a fire under me.
Yeah.
To make me do that.
Yeah. No, thank y'all for that. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So, I'll lean in a little bit here. Like, I love what you were saying, Dave, about not wanting to, sort of lay out this hard sell of like, well, here are the things that you have to believe. Like, I'm very on board with the thought that, like, I mean, and I think I've commented on this before, right? That I feel like beliefs are kind of fundamentally utilitarian. Like, believe what you need to believe what is going to be helpful, right? The outcomes are what are really in view, and like getting your exact set of doctrine correct is not the point, right? But for me personally, so I straight up, yeah, I totally believe in literal resurrection. And I think even if I'm wrong, right, which, because hey, I'm comfortable with that possibility, right? So like whatever dramatic thing did happen, something, and somebody made this point, right? Something dramatic did have to happen to shake people out enough, right? Except for the women who were just incredibly brave and like, yeah, Roman soldiers, whatever. So the thing that jumps out at me, and this is, for me, this is the power of the literal resurrection, right? And maybe other explanations could capture the same power, but what you need is something that says, yeah, no, the power of state violence is not scary. The power of the state to take your life horribly is not scary. This is why. So I think there's one part of this is definitely the ability to sign up for a new vision of human life and community and peace and justice. And like, we should live that way, right? But even if you're living that way, somebody can still come along and say, actually, we're going to crucify you now.
Right.
So you need the other piece of what it is that makes you say, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important part of the story.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, I tend to agree. I think that, and I would say that I don't mind saying that my belief is more like I have to believe this. I don't mind saying that this is part of what I need to make the world intelligible and to believe that things are worthwhile, right? Because yeah, the state has a monopoly of violence, and that's part of what this is a story about. And essentially God saying to the state, no, I'm sorry, your monopoly of violence isn't sufficient to corner the market on all the goods in the universe. I've got that. To me, this is God's, he's laying down the card that wins the game. She is laying down the card that wins that wins the game, because it is. It's like, otherwise, yeah. For me, it's there's a reason not to despair, and that God is still in the process of unfolding the story. And as you said, I don't know whether that means. I think the implicit theology of the Bible is that Christ comes in a glorified body, that there's a new creation, and I don't know in terms of elements and atoms and molecules, that it was the same molecules that constituted Christ's, or you know what I'm saying? It's like, then, like, what absurd thing what sci-fi are we trying to create here? That there's a new creation, recognize it or don't, like, that's Jesus. I mean, they grab his feet. The women grab his feet. I mean, it's like he's such a physical presence. He eats fish. I mean, I think that's part of the implicit theology of the Bible. But as you said, I'm not trying to like say this is why you have to believe. For me, these are reasons to hope, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I just looking around, like, I see why so many people are turned away from church.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I was one of them. But all the things that people do, quote unquote, in the name of Jesus, is just, I was thinking about our gubernatorial candidate who decided that his mission is to pick on children.
Yeah.
This is what God has called you to do, is terrorize children. How does that make sense? Like, how do you call yourself a Christian? How is wearing, quote unquote, women's clothing okay as long as you're making fun of people?
Mm-hmm.
But when people are doing this to try to make sense of their life, somehow or another, that's a problem. There ain't no God in that, folks.
Yeah.
There's no God in that at all.
He doesn't believe a word he's saying. Did you see yesterday the post where in his high school yearbook he was in a drag show?
That's what I was talking about. It's okay to make fun of people.
Wow.
By you being a man wearing a dress. But it's not okay for someone trying to make sense of their mind not identifying with their exterior, and that's how they're doing it to cope. For some reason, that it's okay to make fun of those people, but it's not okay. But it's okay to make fun of them in their mindset. Like, that's the only way you can do that. You have to make fun of them. You can't embrace people for doing what you did in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my strange theology of the Genesis story is that whole eat this apple and you'll be able to judge between good and evil, is that the original sin is our judging other people and deciding who is good and who is bad.
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, Paula, because I wanted to pick up on that on this week's lectionary readings. Like, I think it's so interesting. This is like the second or third time this year, that Gaffney has returned us to the creation story. It's almost like she's pointing us back to, like, don't forget where it all started. Like, don't forget what God says about, how people are created. All people are created. I do want to make sure to read Camille's comment in the chat that says, I have wondered if sometimes this is the, quote, last temptation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to express appreciation for that reading from her lectionary, like the way she translated that. God, he doing a thing, the Spirit of God, she doing a thing. So we've teed up he and she.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to create humankind in their image, he and she, right? And everything in between. And God, they did this work and they rested.
Yeah.
Like, it makes me want to start using they them pronouns for God.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it really does. I think I as you said, I love, we've kind of been on this journey with Willa Gaffney this lectionary year. The way that she has come back to that, Melissa, as you say, there is a theme of this inclusion stuff is not just like, we didn't just invent this. This isn't just like some social justice-y 2020 thing. This is, this goes 3,000 years back or more to saying that human beings are made in the image of God. That means transgender kids are in the image of God. Like this is part of what God intends. This embracing inclusion, diversity. These aren't just buzzwords that modern. Yeah, none of this is new stuff. Yeah.
Before service, I was at the Church of the Golden Girls watching the episode where Rose had gotten Blanche and Dorothy to go on this TV show, this morning show.
Uh-huh.
And it was a morning show about women. But they said, and we have here 4 lesbians. And so, like, Rose, of course, Blanche and Dorothy are lesbians. So they're like, we're not lesbians, but they went ahead and did it they took one for the team for their friend. So the announcer goes, and here we have Dorothy, a lesbian, blah, 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 blah. And then we have Blanche, another lesbian, blah, blah, blah. And then they got these two actual lesbians on the corner, and they say, and these are interior designers. And they were like, well, aren't they lesbians? We don't like labels. And I just like, oh, so we've been doing this label thing since the 80s. We don't the no labels. It's been a thing since the 80s. There's nothing new under the sun,
Oh
folks.
man.
There's nothing new. They were like, oh, we don't like labels. I'm like, okay.
I'm gonna have to go find that episode. That's awesome.
It was hilarious.
Oh, I love it. Well, hey, on that note, since we're approaching 11 o'clock, we don't have to. I really appreciate the rich discussion. Love seeing y'all for Easter Sunday and celebrating the Resurrection Day with you. Let's go back to the lectionary, not the lectionary, the liturgy, yes, and then we'll close it out.
God of resurrection, of empty tombs, you heal those of us paralyzed with fear, and you tell us, fear not, when we are overwhelmed. We give you thanks for the steadfast witness of women and men who come to us with good news.
Fear not, go in peace, tell the truth, speak bravely, teach gently, listen humbly, love deeply. Amen.
Amen. Again, it was wonderful to see you. Those of you who are watching on YouTube or Facebook, again, if you don't mind just clicking like or typing where you're watching from in the comments, that gives us a way to count you with us today. I'm going to stop the live stream. Those of you on the Zoom call, if you'll stick around for just a minute more.